You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the fourth Doctor story, The Deadly Assassin. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Folks, be sure to write an Apple Podcast review and share the podcast with your friends. Help us grow our community of Doctor Who fans and reach more listeners. That's the number one way this podcast grows, is by you sharing it with others and letting other people know about it. I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network you are definitely sure to enjoy, called Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. You can find that wherever fine podcasts are found, or at sqpn.com/mysterious. So we are talking about this fourth Doctor story called The Deadly Assassin. Jimmy, can you give us a recap of that before we get into the discussion?
This week, having been summoned to Gallifrey and having dropped off Sarah Jane, the companionless fourth Doctor arrives on his home planet for our first adventure set on Gallifrey. As he's going there, he receives a vision of the Time Lord President being assassinated. He tries to stop the assassination, but fails. Since the President didn't name a successor before he died, an election must now be held. The Doctor is suspected of the crime himself and is almost sentenced to execution, but he invokes a provision of the Time Lord Constitution that allows him to run for president. He and Chancellor Goth are the only two candidates. Evidence emerges that the Master, now in a decayed state, is behind the assassination, and he has an ally on the High Council. In episode 3, the Doctor goes into the Matrix, and so the plot hits a wall of solid asbantium, a substance 400 times stronger than diamond, and it feels like it will take the Doctor 4.5 billion years to punch his way through it. So nothing of much significance happens in episode 3. It's all running around and let's torture the Doctor games for basically the whole runtime. The only notable thing that happens is that the Doctor learns the Master's ally on the High Council is Chancellor Goth himself, and the Doctor defeats him in the Matrix. When the plot finally resumes in episode 4, Goth has been fatally injured and dies. The Master fakes his death and then reemerges to enact his ultimate plan. He's at the end of his regeneration cycle, so he wants to use the artifacts carried by the President to regenerate himself and unleash the power of the Eye of Harmony black hole and destroy Time Lord civilization and control the universe. The Doctor prevents him from doing this, but the Master escapes. Ultimately, he and the Doctor both leave and head back out into the universe. The end.
That is an accurate representation of what happens, including episode 3. So a couple of notable things about this story is it's the first time in Classic Who that we have a whole story where the Doctor has no companion, which I guess was they were testing it out as this idea that maybe the Doctor doesn't need to have someone tagging along.
Well, I don't know if they were seriously testing that. They may or may not have been, but Tom Baker for a time did not want a companion after Sarah Jane left, and that caused some tensions between him and the next companion, Leela. He also talked about having like maybe a talking cabbage that he could have as a companion, if I recall correctly. And
got a robot dog. That was close enough, right?
Well, yeah. What they found in this, though, is they had to give him a bunch of surrogate companions. That's essentially what Castellan Spandrel and Controller Ingen are, is their surrogate companions.
Right. I mean, the Doctor needs to talk to someone to exposit what's going on for the sake of the audience. The companion has always kind of been that audience stand-in. So, like, there's that one point in the very beginning, before he's met these Gallifreyan Time Lords, that he's kind of talking to himself. And so that's how we get our exposition, when he'd be telling this stuff to a companion. So it did seem kind of odd and strange.
Yeah. This is also our first adventure set on Gallifrey. We've had glimpses of Gallifrey before, beginning with the very last episode of the War Games with the Second Doctor, and then we saw it briefly in the Three Doctors, for example, in the Third Doctor's time. But this is the first time we've spent a whole adventure on Gallifrey, and in this story, Robert Holmes, who is an excellent writer for Who, establishes bunches of new stuff about Time Lord culture. This is our introduction of the Matrix. Which is, I don't mind them having a supercomputer, but I don't like the holodeck aspect of it because it's a holodeck. Also, this introduces the Time Lord chapters, like the Doctor is a member of the Prydonian House. It introduces the headdresses and robes that they wear on ceremonial occasions. It introduces Barusa. It introduces Rassilon. Omega had previously been mentioned, and we'd even seen him, but this is the first time we get Rassilon. We have the first mention of the Shobogans. We're not really told what they are, but they're apparently some kind of fringe group from a Time Lord perspective, and they will come back in later as sort of the pre-Time Lord Gallifreyans. And so, like in Chris Chibnall's time, Tecteun is a Shobogan. We also get the 12 limit regeneration, or the 12 regeneration limit in this, which is just to explain the Master's desperation. That's its function in the plot. That's the only reason they introduce it. Interestingly, so Tom Baker is the fourth Doctor that we've seen on screen having adventures, but already in the brain of Morbius, in the mind duel with Morbius, we'd seen another set of incarnations that preceded William Hartnell, who were known as the Morbius Doctors, and there were 8 of them. And so if you add 8 and 4, that would make Tom Baker the 12th incarnation of the Doctor, and he would only have one more regeneration. He would regenerate at the end of Tom Baker into the 13th Doctor, and then they'd have to deal with this issue. But since they decided to later ignore the Morbius Doctors, they were able to put that issue off until Matt Smith. Then they brought them back in, and it all makes sense now.
At least they fixed it.
Yeah. So now there is one thing about the third episode, though, of this, is it's probably one of the most controversial episodes of up to that time of classic Who. The closing scene, which has been cut, which was actually cut almost right after it was aired, basically, was a scene of the Doctor being drowned, and you actually see Tom Baker being held underwater, apparently drowning.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was such a traumatic a scene that a woman by the name of Mary Whitehouse, who was the head of their basically their decency board, National Viewers and Listeners Association, raised a huge stink. Actually, the showrunner at the time got fired basically because of that scene.
Oh wow.
Philip Hinchcliffe. Yeah, he didn't come back next season.
And he and like I said, after they aired it, they cut and threw away the tape, the film of it. But you've since restored it. They actually restored it shortly after from other footage. But
for home video.
Home video. But if you watch BritBox, it's not there. The last scene is you see Goff, you're finished, Doctor, you're finished. And then it cuts to credits.
Oh, okay.
But in the original,
I was so confused.
It says you finished, and then you see the Doctor underwater. Now, of course, the start of the fourth, you see him briefly underwater, and then he comes out.
So they felt it was too violent to see the Doctor being held underwater.
Dramatic.
Yeah.
Okay. Mary Whitehouse she's sort of like a British equivalent of Jerry Falwell. She was a citizen who, was concerned about television decency and the idea of having a children's show graphically showing a realistic, this is not a cartoon, a live action, realistic looking man being drowned was over the line for her. And so she led a campaign against it. It led to Philip Hinchcliffe's contract not being renewed. And that put a damper on some of the horror that they were starting to introduce into the show. It didn't, because they had this kind of gothic horror this is sort of Hammer horror light for children era, which I think is great, but and it doesn't completely go away. There are things like in next season's The Talons of Wang Chiang that are pretty strong. They're pretty, horror-y, but it did get toned down somewhat.
I mean, certainly the Decayed Master is pretty, especially for the time. Even now, like it's pretty, gross for little kids. I can see that having, sort of Doctor Who getting that reputation for that gothic horror for kids idea. Yeah, I can see it.
And he is I have in my notes new horror master. Because he's all burned and decayed and stuff like that. This version of him appears only twice. It will this version of the Master will occur later again at the end of Tom Baker's run. Now in this episode, he's played by the actor Peter Pratt, who was known for doing a lot of D'Oyly Carte theater productions. And so he has this kind of over the top, theater vibe to him. He will be replaced in The Keeper of Traken by the actor Jeffrey Beavers, and who incidentally was married to the actress who played Liz Shaw.
Oh, wow.
But Jeffrey, unfortunately, Peter Pratt didn't survive long enough to do a lot of Big Finish audio, but Jeffrey Beavers has. Right. And he is an excellent master for Big Finish. We really need to do the one that he wrote called I Am the Master, which is really nicely done.
We did one with him. Where
we did him in the vault.
The vault, right. What was I going to say? The way that the Master appears in this one, this is sort of it's not a regeneration of the Roger Delgado Master, I assume. It's just he's been damaged.
It's ambiguous. It's unclear whether this is a damaged version of Roger Delgado or whether this is a separate incarnation post Roger Delgado, and they've never clarified that on screen. So if you look in other sources like novels and things like that and reference books, sometimes it's considered to be Roger Delgado decayed, and sometimes it's considered to be a separate incarnation. But there was some kind of accident that damaged him, and in the spin-off literature, even when he gets a new body, that body inevitably reverts to the decayed state. So he's, for a long time, he's just, until New Who, basically, he's just running to find new bodies because he's burning through them as they go decayed.
Interesting. I didn't feel like, this Master didn't feel like the Roger Delgado Master. Let me put it that way.
It doesn't,
more like the John Sim, frankly. It was a little, off kilter, off balance, Well,
I think when your body decays to that state, that's going to probably affect your mental well-being as well.
That's true. And as we mentioned before, the Roger Delgado wasn't available because he had died in a car accident, unfortunately. So, you mentioned the all the elements of this episode. It's interesting because we kind of watched a kind of sequel to this story recently when we did the one where Leela departs. I forget the name of that one.
The Invasion of Time.
The Invasion of Time.
Yeah, it's timey-wimey on this show. So
yes, and so it's interesting. We saw. So this is how the Doctor became president of Gallifrey, and this is how all of these things, elements that we see in that, are introduced at this point, a couple of years before.
Yeah, because he was the only he and Goth were the only candidates in the election. So if Goth died, the Doctor wins by default, but Cardinal Barusa shoos him off Gallifrey so quickly that he doesn't take office.
Right. And, they talk about the Matrix. I sometimes wonder, did the makers of the movie The Wachowskis, did they get the idea for the Matrix from Doctor Who? I don't know if it's ever been said, but it's certainly kind of similar. Like
that's a little bit different, though. I mean, the Matrix is, it's a computer system that generates the world they're in, whereas this Matrix is it's the stored memories and basically neurological or pathways of the brain.
Yeah.
That pathways of neurons in the brain that create this world. It's a little bit different.
Yeah, it's still though they're living in a virtual world in their heads when they're connected to all these other minds. I don't know. It just
and that's
feels
a concept that's been around even before this. So.
I guess it's kind of interesting.
What I thought was interesting is they only really do it in this story, but we're told that the Matrix is the stored memories of all the Time Lords, and we actually see the process because that's how the Doctor gets into it. He's just not dying, but apparently what they normally do is, as you're just about to die, they bring you down to Coordinator Engen, and he lays you on a table and puts you and you're unconscious. And he puts you on a table and puts a thing on your head, and then it runs an electric current through your head, which will be painful if you're not unconscious, and makes a copy of your memories, and then you die. And so it doesn't kill you, but you die. And so it's a little. I'd forgotten that they explained what's happening to the Doctor as this is just what normally happens to a dying Time Lord. And so it's like, oh, that's pretty creepy. I'd assume they had like a radio implant or something that, records your memories as you're dying.
Yeah.
Well, and eventually at Trial of the Time Lord, they explained that TARDISes have basically recording devices that do the same function as the Time Lord is out and about.
Right.
And that's how they were able to get the footage of everything that happened in Trial of the Time Lord.
Have we seen much of the Matrix in New Who? I don't think we have.
Well, they so seldom gone to Gallifrey, but we do see it in the Timeless Children.
Right, that's true. Right. Okay, now I remember.
And just like here, the Master has access to it. And it calls it his domain in this story.
One thing besides the companionless Doctor in this one, another new element they introduce is an opening narration and crawl where Tom Baker narrates the opening. I don't think they ever did that again. It was kind of weird.
They've done similar things. They notably do it in New Who. Periodically, Stephen Moffat would occasionally do things like that.
Oh yeah,
but it's very rarely used in Old Who. I don't know that this is the only occurrence of it, but it is very rare.
Yeah.
By the way, speaking,
somebody asked, this was before Star Wars. This was a year before Star Wars. So
yeah.
This is where he got that idea. Oh no.
Also, speaking of which things come before other things and the names of things, we have Castellan Spandrel in this. Now, Castellan is it's a term from medieval Europe. It refers to the guy who's in charge of running a castle. And so I don't know, maybe Castellan Spandrel is in charge of running a tower on Gallifrey because they keep talking about this particular tower. But his name, Spandrel. Okay. Spandrel is a term in architecture and biology. It refers to the sort of triangular curved space between the top of an arch and the rectangular frame that it's set in. So if you imagine a circle inside of a square, the parts outside the circle but within the square are the spandrels. And spandrels are not very useful. They don't play an architectural role supporting anything. They're just there, and they're blank space. So architects tend to fill them up with designs. So they're like little artistic things that don't really play a function. And that led to their adoption as a term in biology. The evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould noticed that, hey, we've got some features of living organisms that are they don't kind of don't play a function anymore. They've lost their evolutionary function, but they're still there, and so they're sort of decorative. They're kind of like spandrels, and so he dubbed these biological features spandrels. And I looked to see whether this episode was written after Stephen Jay Gould coined that term in biology, and it wasn't. This precedes it. So Robert Holmes is drawing on exclusively on the architectural use of spandrel, but it's still kind of like a decorative, useless thing.
Which is funny because he's probably the most sympathetic
active
character inactive, of all of them. He's the one that pretty much immediately says, "Okay, doctor, I'll follow your lead."
Right,
and does.
Right. He's the smartest of them all. That in following the doctor's lead.
Except so he's pretty cruel to his guards, especially the one.
Well,
guy, but
Hilrid, yeah.
Hilrid seems not all that competent, but. It starts with the doctor having this vision of himself assassinating the Time Lord president. What is that from? I must have missed why he was having this vision, unless they didn't tell us.
The master, they didn't tell us, but the master, they sort of did. The master planted it in his mind. In fact, they later, it goes by quickly in dialogue, but they later establish that it was the master who summoned Tom Baker to Gallifrey. It wasn't the Time Lord Council. He was not expected. The master wanted him here for this and sent a fake message.
Yeah, they said that the Matrix, the purpose of the Matrix is to predict events, and the Matrix had predicted this, and the master had basically beamed it to the doctor
and intercepted it, so the council didn't know about the attempt.
Right.
Okay.
So yes, it was the master who broke up Tom Baker and his girlfriend.
And so there's a scene once the doctor where Spandrel and Akin are reviewing the doctor's his record, his criminal record, and is pardoned by the CIA, the Celestial Intelligence Agency. So I thought that was interesting. So he's got a criminal record, which I guess has been established with the second doctor, right? That was the criminal record, that trial? Okay.
And the banishment to Earth, that's what they're talking about.
Okay. And then there was a nice moment. So there's this reporter, basically, for the Public Register video, right? He's the TV reporter. Runcible is his name. And he's apparently was a student of Cardinal Barusa at the Time Lord Academy or whatever. And he's trying to interview Barusa and Barusa says to him, "You had ample opportunity to ask me questions during your misspent years at the Academy. You failed to avail yourself of the opportunity then, and it is too late now. Good day." And walks off.
Barusa is a total jerk in this.
He does come off as kind of a jerk. That's
very supercilious.
Although, sometimes you want to see politicians talking to the reporters.
Yeah, Runcible is a deliberately lightweight character. When the doctor recognizes him on the TV, he's like, "Oh, Runcible the fatuous."
Right.
The doctor also has an interesting ruse to get out, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But so his TARDIS has shown up. And it's not expected, and so guards are rushing towards it, and he says to himself, because he has no companion, "I've got to get past them and warn the president." And so he starts assembling a hookah pipe, and he says to himself, "Cash and carry Constantinople," apparently where he bought it.
Yeah.
And so he lights the pipe, and he's got it set next to essentially a mock-up of himself. It's really his hat and coat on a chair with his back turned to the door. So they'll think that's the doctor sitting right there, smoking a hookah, and they do. And so he's able to sneak around the other side of them. And so I thought it was an interesting ruse. And I was thinking, so this is like 1975 when this is made. And he's like, okay, cash and carry Constantinople. I guess you would have to maybe go to some unless you're in a major city, you would have to go to some rather extreme lengths to purchase a hookah at the time. You couldn't just go on the internet. But I'm like, okay, yesterday I was down at the Middle Eastern market after Mass, and they had a whole rack of them.
Yeah. I guess in the early 70s, late 60s, hookahs had a whole different sense about them, at least in the West, outside of Turkey.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they take the TARDIS, they store it in a museum for whatever reason, especially, I guess, because it's old.
It's a museum piece. Yeah. It's like the last of that model left.
And that's where the Doctor emerges and steals some cardinal robes that are being displayed in the museum, and then switches with some other Time Lord so that he can get into the Panopticon. That's basically like the chamber, the government chamber. And he goes up into the gallery and picks up a gun that's there and looks through the scope of the sight at the president with it. Which is, why would you do that? Because then someone else ends up shooting the president, and so we have a presidential assassination with a second gunman.
Yeah, so they eventually clarify this. It is not clear as it's happening, but he's reenacting what he saw in his vision, because he did see himself with the gun and apparently shoot the president. Oh. He runs up into the balcony area where there's the TV camera, which is ridiculously huge. I guess Time Lord television includes way more than just visual data for an advanced civilization.
Yep.
And he finds the gun, which is a rifle, and it's a fancy rifle with a transparent plastic hilt and stuff. But he picks up the rifle, and what he's doing, and this is a bad idea, but what he's doing is scanning the area around the president for the actual assassin. He's going to try to shoot the actual assassin. And he doesn't stop, and the actual assassin is standing right next to the president, and does kill him. What he doesn't know, what the Fourth Doctor doesn't know, is that the sights on the rifle have been skewed, so he will miss. Yep. And they later find where his staser bolt impacted a wall of the Panopticon. But if you think about this, you're trying to stop an assassination. You run up, you see a gun. You've already seen yourself in vision apparently shoot the president. Maybe if you point a gun at the president, it will just go off. Right. So this isn't the best idea, but that's what he's doing.
Yeah, that's kind of what they imply in the footage, where he's surprised when it goes off.
Yeah.
That it went off because he was holding it. Right.
So, they see him standing there with the gun. They grab him. I have to say, Time Lord society here is there's very little justice we've seen between this, the trial of a Time Lord, the second Doctor's trial. So they decide, well, now we have to have his execution right after the trial. We have to do that right away now. Like we've already determined he's guilty, but we have to have the trial. And we'll extract his confession using torture on top of it.
Yeah, they actually torture him as he's in the cage being held up, hands over his head,
This is not a just society.
No, and part of that is Robert Holmes's kind of subversive anti-establishment thing.
He had that going on, yeah.
Yeah, but it's also partly I think they partly want to explain why the Doctor would run away. If his people were so perfect, why would he ever leave? So they can't be that perfect. We know they're non-interventionists, and so if they're imperfect non-interventionists, that's going to point you towards sort of Byzantine intrigues and internal problems.
Right.
And so, that's a reasonable reading on the Time Lords. But yeah, they do. They totally torture him.
Right.
They do try to provide an explanation for why they want the trial so fast. And there's two real explanations. One of them, the real explanation, is that Chancellor Goth is the assassin. And so he wants to do in Tom Baker so that he's in the clear. Oh, yeah, we caught the assassin. We executed him. It's all done.
Yeah.
The other reason, the reason that Goth gives to the others is, I'm probably going to be elected president. since at the time he was the only one running, and consequently, if he's still alive when I take office, I will have to make the choice of either pardoning my predecessor's assassin, which would not look good, or having my first act of office be an execution, which would not be an auspicious way to start my reign. And so he wants to avoid the dilemma by having it all sorted out before the election occurs. And it's at that point Tom Baker invokes his constitutional right to run for office and not have his campaign impeded. And then Goth is informed by Barusa, I think, that this proceeding must be suspended until after the election.
I'm going to guess they closed that loophole after all of this.
Well, maybe, but Goth says he wants to. He says at one point, "I'm going to have to talk with so and so about changing that rule, about modifying it."
So eventually, the doctor discovers the cameraman who was supposed to be manning that camera position,
and he's been turned into a Ken doll.
He's been compression shrunk. And stuffed in the camera. The other Time Lords don't know about the Master at this point. He's unknown.
Yeah, this is weird. The doctor tells them it's the Master, and they do a computer search. They do a record search, and they come back and they say no Time Lord has ever taken that appellation. And I'm thinking two things. Well, number one, what about the Time Lord that showed up in the very first Roger Delgado episode to warn John Pertwee that the Master was on Earth and might show up? Apparently they knew about him then, but they talk in this about the Master's data record has been wiped. It's or removed from the record. So maybe that happened after the John Pertwee era.
Right.
Number two, I'm thinking, well, if they don't know him by the name the Master, just tell him his real name. You knew him as a kid. But that doesn't end up happening.
Yeah.
And his civilian identity records could have been lifted too.
Sure. Yeah. And of course the Matrix is unhackable. That's impossible.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, it's always the impossible.
Well, it's just like the idea of erasing this type of record of this type of database is impossible unless you've got these super mathematical skills, and of course the Master has those. So,
yes,
I mean,
as does the Doctor, of course.
As does the Doctor. Yep.
We have to. So, so that's when the Doctor goes inside the Matrix, and so this is the things he encounters.
And the Matrix turns out to be a rock quarry filled up with stock footage of alligators.
Yes,
and
it's Westworld.
And later it's a botanical garden.
So we have alligator samurai, crazy surgeons, a World War I doughboy, runaway trains, a giant bird egg, for some reason, that he steps in, a scary clown, an attacking biplane, a big game hunter, and a very unrealistic spider. just for kicks. I wrote it all down because I was like, this is a bizarre sequence that we've got here.
I like the train too. It wasn't even like a full-size train. It was like a model, not really a model. It was more like you would use
little engine
mine carts. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you see the kids' amusement park. Yes.
I miss the spider. I missed the spider. I did like the egg. I don't know if it was a bird egg, but I liked the egg when he steps in. It's big and weird. But I missed the spider. I at some point in episode 3, I started multitasking and doing other stuff because I know nothing is going to happen in the plot.
Well, the spider was of no consequence. Like he was hiding in a bush, and the big game hunter Goth was, stalking him up the hill, and then you see the spider on this big web. It was like a Halloween decoration. It was not at all scary. And it's there. And then it kind of crawls down and walks away while Tom Baker starts chewing on the leaves of the bush.
I saw him chewing on the leaves. I missed the spider. Yeah.
It was very bizarre. I saw it in the transcript, so that might be why I saw it. It was kind of there and not. So then the hunter, turns out to be Goth, tries to poison a pool of water because the Doctor has had no water inside the Matrix. But I'm looking at it going,
the doctor must have diabetes or something if he's got to drink that often.
Well, also, it'd be crazy to drink out of that disease-ridden pool of water. It was gross. I mean, you don't need poison to kill him. You just drink that water.
Well, and then he eventually slurps out of a little puddle inside of a depression in the mud, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is... I hope Tom Baker, the actor, didn't really drink from that.
Or they prepared it ahead of time with, special water. Yeah.
And special sanitized dirt.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Although he's very clever. He finds the poison bottle that Goth has discarded, which was sloppy. Like, he
just throws it on the ground after he's done with it.
Yeah, as a nice marker for the doctor to find. But he ends up making a poison dart out of it, which was clever. Like, he found a little reed and made a blow dart out of it. So that was clever. And so eventually, as you say, he escapes from the Matrix. And we find out that Goth is the Master's henchman. The doctor ends up, does the doctor kill Goth, or is Goth dying just as a consequence?
So the doctor injures Goth in the Matrix, and that pops Goth out of the Matrix. And so he's laying on this table talking to the Master, who wants him to go back in and kill the doctor. And he's like, this isn't working. And so the Master decides to try to do something to the Matrix that will kill the doctor. And Goth is like, hey, you're about to kill me too.
Yeah.
And the Master says, I have no time for you. And he proceeds to do some operation to torture Tom Baker in the Matrix, which doesn't end up killing him, but it does end up mortally wounding Goth.
Right.
And so Goth is just laying there on the table in the process of dying. And the Master decides to drug himself with a ridiculously modern insulin syringe. And it's like, I was thinking, well, if they showed us a futuristic syringe, maybe they think the kids in the audience won't know what it is. But it's like, okay, that's just an insulin syringe with a little bit of Kool-Aid in it.
They probably just borrowed it from a cast member, or somebody on the staff or something.
Right.
Oh, we need somebody to show this you injecting himself. Oh, here, this will work. We'll just borrow this for a second.
Yeah. But he injects himself with some kind of not neurotoxin, but neuroinhibitor.
Death. Yeah,
it's just paralyzing.
Yeah.
To stop or slow down his heart so much that they will think he's dead.
Right.
And he just sits there waiting for the drug to wear off, paralyzed. And meanwhile, they come in, they talk to Goth, and Goth dies on him.
Yeah. Speaking of the Master, like they have a mask on the actor, and it's got these creepy lidless eyes, like the eyes have been burned off or whatever. And so he can't blink. That would drive me crazy. He can't blink. Well,
yeah.
So, and in the process of trying to kill the doctor in the Matrix, the Master damages it to a point where Spandrel and Engen have to make this choice. Do we save the doctor, but let the Matrix be destroyed and lose all of these memories? And Spandrel makes the pro-life choice. He says, he's alive. Those are just memories of dead people. I'll take the living person over the dead memories. So I thought that was kind of cool that he listened. But it smokes and fills up the room with all this smoke as it's going through things. The doctor wakes up and the first thing he says is, do you mind? This is a non-smoking compartment.
Yeah.
I thought that was really good. That was a classic Tom Baker. This is about when the Goth, as he's dying, explains, he monologues about what's going on.
Yeah, and he answers a question that I had written in my notes. Why shoot a resigning president?
Yes.
Because you're not going to stop him from making any further decisions. The only thing that occurred to me was that, he was supposed to name a successor, and that would be the only reason to kill they mentioned personal grudge, but Tom Baker says, I never met the man. And why would you do it as he's resigning? You could kill him anytime. But if he's supposed to name a successor on his resignation day and you kill him before he does, then that would be a motive for assassination, to stop him from naming somebody. And since Goth was apparently going to succeed him based on everyone's guess, now the president had said, he had a list of names for honors for Resignation Day, and there were some names that were going to surprise them. And then as he's dying, Tom Baker asked him the question, why kill him when he's about to resign? And Goss says, he told me I wasn't going to be his successor. It was going to be somebody else.
Right. So he has the motive. And this is where we also get the reveal about the master's motive of no more regenerations and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So Barusa, who seems to kind of be the power behind the throne, he's the real force behind things. He wants to hide Goth's involvement in the master's plans to take over and make Goth into a martyred hero, because then there would be, people would be panic in the streets, would be scandal. We can't have that.
And he wants to disfigure the master even more. Right. It's like, he's pretty disfigured now, dude.
Not sure it's going to be much use, but okay.
Take him away and shoot him in the face with a staser. It's like, I don't know if you need to do that, but if that's what you want, okay. This is more of Robert Holmes's cynicism about the upper class coming in.
Yeah, there was also a line where he says...
about them not telling the truth about history. Yeah,
like... only in mathematics we will find truth. Was the saying that he used to say, and so kind of calling out Barusa as a cynic and a politician. So the master's been playing dead, because obviously this is wrapped up too quickly. We still got a half an episode.
We've got 20 minutes of runtime left.
Yeah. So he played dead to get into the vault and get at the relics of Rassilon, which we have this interesting explanation that the relics are not merely ceremonial, but they actually played a role in Rassilon's grabbing of the Eye of Harmony, which is a black hole. The eye. Yeah.
So basically, there are two relevant relics in this. One of them is the sash of Rassilon, and if you're wearing that, it will protect you from the black hole. And the second is the key, which is a ceremonial rod. It's kind of short. It looks like it's maybe 3 feet long, and that will let you control the black hole.
The sash looks an awful lot like a Archbishop's pallium, by the way.
Yeah. Very similar. There's a lot of the garb in this that matches,
some Catholic
liturgical
stuff.
Wear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they call them cardinals, so yeah.
It looks like a pallium made of little sandbags.
Yes, it's like a weighted blanket pallium. Actually, my son would probably love that. So he loves weighted weighted blanket.
Speaking of the Eye of Harmony, they've got another inconsistency here where the Castellan says, "Well, that's a myth, that's a legend."
And
it's like, dude, this is your nuclear power source. This is your power plant.
This is what powers Gallifreyan society, right?
Yeah,
and it's stored underneath the Panopticon. Yeah. So
in a big black monolith,
right? Connected with these hoses that are connected that are stabilizing it somehow, which the master starts disconnecting so that he can access it. And the doctor, obviously the last second, the doctor gets them reconnected before all, hell breaks loose and all that sort of thing. But he destroys half the city and thousands are dead. I mean, this is a major disaster for Gallifrey.
The doctor also warns the master that and this logic may or may not be accurate, because the sash may not have been designed to protect you from a staser bolt. By the way, notice the Star Trek influence. We have stasers instead of phasers. Yeah.
Yes.
But he tells the master, don't think that sash is going to protect you, because the president was wearing it when he was assassinated, and so whatever function it performed in the past, it's obviously been damaged.
Right.
But it is doing something. They later established that it's not completely inert.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. So Barusa now is got to figure out a way to explain this latest disaster of half the city being destroyed, and what will we say? And the doctor says, "Well, you'll have to adjust the truth again. What about subsidence owing to a plague of mice?"
Yeah. and Barusa is very, condescending to the doctor and is shooing him off Gallifrey. But then as the doctor is leaving, he turns to him and says, "Doctor, 9 out of 10.
9 out of 10.
Well, you know, the funny part is the doctor's like, well, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I'll be glad to go, sir. You know,
Yeah.
and it seems like he's being, sarcastic, but then when he says 9 out of 10, Doctor grins, just
Oh, thank you, sir.
ecstatic of this wonderful grade he just got,
Yeah.
So, and we have also this discussion of how the master could have survived, where the doctor discusses, oh, he's not necessarily dead. There's these ways that he could have survived and gone off, and
he basically fell into a big crack when the floor opened up.
Yeah, exactly. He fell in wearing the sash.
Wearing the sash.
So that's gone. Did he leave behind the key? I forget.
He had stuck that into a hole in the floor.
Right. That's right. So,
but then we see the sash later when at the Leela episode. Anyway.
Okay. In the Invasion of Time. Right. That's right. It's back. Cool. All right. Any other thoughts on this episode, Father Cory?
So Goth found the master almost dead and found him on Tercerus, which is see later, Curse of the Fatal Death.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Which is the title of the Curse of the Fatal Death was also obviously a play on the deadly assassin. It's the other kinds of assassin, the not so deadly, the fatal death. Yeah.
No, there's no definite article. The Curse of Fatal Death.
Right. Fatal death. Right.
And then I got kind of kick out of the Staser. It basically looked like they took the receiver, the bottom part of an AR-15, and just tacked some stuff on top of it.
Right.
I mean, even like the little small 10-round clip sticking out of it.
Yes, yeah. They did not spend a lot of time designing unique props for Doctor Who. That is for sure. Not like Star Trek or other a lot of American sci-fi shows. They were very much about props and making it look very different. Whereas the British productions, they just grab stuff out of the prop room.
Just kind of one small funny thing that, with the newer resolution and everything and clarity of TV today compared to 1976 when this aired, of course, the big reveal of Goff was at the end of the episode, the third episode, as the hunter. But there were scenes where the light was just right, where you could see his face clearly through the mask.
Right.
That the covering that he was wearing. But of course, in 76, again, the TVs would, better than they would have been in 63, but they still were not that clear that you probably would not have been able to tell very easily then.
Yeah, they didn't have high def.
Yep.
That's true. Like even, transferring the old film to high def, you're still getting a better view. Yeah, I was wondering why it was such a big deal. Like I figured it was Goth ages ago. Why is it a big reveal now? Yeah.
And not just high def. They didn't have 65-inch standard definition TVs like I had a 65-inch high definition TV on my wall.
Sure.
So you're watching on, figure 20-inch, something along that lines in your living room. You're not going to have the resolution to see what was going on, but
that is
it's still
true.
kind of funny that difference in 50 years almost.
Yeah, that is true. That's a good point. Like how watching this stuff now, even though it was made using that old technology, we're having a better viewing experience than people then would have had. So that's interesting. Jimmy, any final thoughts?
So for once, we actually see the master get away. After Tom Baker leaves, the Spandrel and Ingen are looking at the master's TARDIS, which is in the form of a grandfather clock, and it starts to activate. They see we get a glimpse. We only see the master's hand, but they see the master step into his TARDIS. We see his hand closing the TARDIS door, and then his TARDIS starts to beam out, and we see the master's face superimposed on the clock face.
Yep.
And he is noticeably, and this was deliberate, he is noticeably less decayed. So he's no longer burned. He is still physically deformed. He's got the big googly eyes, but he's no longer burned in the same way. And so he was able. And I think there's a line of dialogue about this where Tom Baker says this could have happened. But he partially repaired himself with the energy he was able to siphon off from the Eye of Harmony. And they were going to continue playing with this. He was originally scheduled to be the final villain in the Talons of Wang Chiang in the next season, who is also a deformed guy from the future. And there are even traces of the original master reveal in the script, because the guy who's ultimately revealed is a dictator from the 51st century named Magnus Greel. And we get to see his face, and he's deformed too, in a different way, but he's deformed. And earlier, before the reveal of Magnus Greel, they established that whoever is impersonating Wang Chiang, who's a Chinese god, has a time cabinet. And at one point, Wang Chiang gets Leela in his power and says, a morsel to feed my regeneration. And those are lines left over from when the plan was to have the villain be the master. But the showrunner thought it was too soon to have the master back. So they changed the villain to Magnus Greel. And then when they finally do bring, and they had planned when they did bring the master back for him to not be as decayed. But when at the end of Tom Baker's run, when they bring him back in The Keeper of Traken, the masks that
Beavers
that Peter blanking on his last name, Pratt, yeah, the mask that Peter Pratt is wearing here was no longer in good shape. And so they came up with a new decayed master look. He doesn't have the googly eyes, but they painted his face black, and they also painted teeth on his lips, so it would be a little more expressive.
Yeah.
But they came up with the new look for Christopher Beavers.
Okay. So that's the Deadly Assassin, which we've watched. And so
that's what you want. If you're hiring an assassin, you want him to be a deadly assassin. The non-deadly version is clearly inferior as assassins go.
Yeah, you don't want an incompetent assassin. You don't want a mildly wounding assassin. You want a deadly assassin.
It's the annoying assassin. All right. Let's wrap things up there. We'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who, including Debbie L., Jeffrey K., Ann H., Randy W., and Mary K. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest. And you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. We'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. So that's it from us. We'd love to hear what you think of this Fourth Doctor story, The Deadly Assassin. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or send an email to drwho@sqpn.com, or visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. You can watch The Secrets of Doctor Who in full video on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia, where you should also make sure to hit the bell to get notifications. And we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the 12th Doctor story, Last Christmas. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing The Secrets of Doctor Who.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thank you, Dom. And for this episode, 9 out of 10.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, sir. And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, vaporization without representation is against the Constitution.